Welcome, everybody, to Does That Make Sense, episode number 20. We're doing a little different this week. For the first time since the very first intro episode, I am flying solo today. No guest today. Coming up on the holidays, we are just changing it up a little bit. I got some things that have been happening in my life that I want to talk to everybody about, some lessons that I've learned from those things that I think maybe, I don't know, if you're interested, you might be able to learn from and pull something from. If not, some of these stories are a little chaotic and a little crazy, and you might have some fun with that. So we're just going to roll for a little bit here, and we'll talk to you guys. First of all, before we get into those stories, I want to say thank you so much for continuing to tune in, continuing to watch, continuing to listen. There'll be people that I haven't seen in a long time that I run into at some event or dinner or even in the grocery store or somewhere. And they'll say something like, "Hey, I listened to the one," or I, tuned in, and that was funny, or keep it up, or whatever. And so just thanks for continuing to do that. Go ahead and keep sharing, keep liking, keep commenting. And if you haven't done either of those things, go ahead and start. It just keeps the engagement up, gets other people's eyeballs in front of this. And maybe we'll have some more fun as more people get tuned in and we get to talk to some more people. So we're excited about what's coming up. Like I said, the holidays are approaching us. As we're recording this, we're kind of piling up some in the stockpile here because everybody's going to be busy around the holidays. We're coming up right now on Thanksgiving. This is going to air after Thanksgiving. And so we're coming up on Christmas. We're coming up on New Year's. Everybody gets excited about the holidays. I have been experiencing some very unique situations that have brought on different levels of stress, different levels of uncertainty, different levels of chaos, and they've all worked out really good. Spoiler alert! But I want to talk about them because I think that there's some lessons that I learned from them that I think we could all benefit from. If you guys remember several episodes ago, I was talking about taking my wife to Aruba for her 40th birthday. She wanted to, my wife, my sister, my brother-in-law, and myself all said that when we turn 40, we are going to pick where we want to go, and the four of us have to go as a little quartet and do that trip. When I turned 40, I'm a big history guy, and I like, the story of, America and the development of a country and all that kind of stuff. And so I went to Washington, D.C. All four of us went to Washington, D.C. It was a blast. We got to tour the White House. We got to tour the Capitol building. We've made some jokes on the podcast about how I was in the Capitol building, but I was invited. We saw all the monuments. We read the stuff. We went to the museums. My wife has a completely different take. She likes that stuff, but she said, if I'm turning 40, I want to do it with a cocktail in my hand. I want to do it in a tropical area, and I want it to be all inclusive. And me and Courtney and Danny were all like, say less, let's do this thing. So we went to Aruba, and around this time, my wife and I had been shopping for houses, and we got pre-approved for a certain amount, and it was like, cool, this is exciting, and this should open up some opportunities for us to get some houses. Some of the ones that you kind of drool over were out of the price range, obviously, and you're just kind of like, let's find something we can make it our own. And so my wife, she found one on her birthday. It was September 17th. We're in the hotel room in Aruba. She wakes up, she grabs her phone, she's flipping through TikToks, the things you do when you just in a habit of waking up. And Zillow is something that she gets really into. Even when we weren't looking for houses, she was always sending me Zillow listings. And I joke because she rolls her eyes every time I talk about starting something new or one of the businesses taking on a new task or a new plan. And then she sends me these Zillow listings that are way out of budget. And then I always joke and I say, if you don't want me to keep coming up with new ideas to keep busy and to try to generate some income, then you have to stop sending me insane Zillow listings, right? So we go back and forth, little banter, whatever, haha. But then she found one. She was like, I kind of like this one. And it was a little bit out of the price range. And I was like, well, sometimes these sellers put these things on the market for a high price because they're willing to come down. When we get back home, I'll text the real estate agent that we had made, a connection to. And we had already looked at, I think, 2 houses at this point. And We liked them both. We could afford them both, but they weren't there. They weren't it, And so this one had something about it. We liked the size of it. We've been in a 3-bedroom since we got married, and 3 kids. Our daughters share a bedroom. We have 1 bathroom. There's 5 people that share a house. I mean, it's a lot. We make it work. It's all we've ever known. But then when you start to think about, okay, it might be time to expand. So we reached out to the real estate agent, and I shot her a text on Friday while we were gone, and she's like, "How's tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, we're traveling home tomorrow. So what about Sunday?" So we schedule this showing for Sunday. We look at it and we like it a lot, and it's, like I said, a little out of the price range, but we're thinking about bringing it down. Now, I want to tell this backstory. When we bought our first house, Steph bought it in her name exclusively by herself, because I was running Refuge. I was doing the nonprofit thing. My income wasn't very good. I mean, it was consistent. I could pay the bills that I was responsible for, but there wasn't a lot of overhead. And so when you kind of lump in both of us, we weren't going to really qualify for what we needed back then. And so when you bring into it, Steph by herself was kind of a better candidate at that point. And so she bought the house. So I was going to buy this one. And if you're not in this situation, I'll try to explain it without boring you. But I was going to be what's known as a first-time home buyer, which is a very specific type of loan that the bank gives you in order to get the house. So because I had never bought a house, I was going to qualify for that, which there's benefits to it. There's things that are not great, but the benefits kind of outweigh the negative. And so that's what we were going to do. Anyway, so I go to the bank and I say, "This is the price of the house. We like it. We're really considering putting an offer in. And I just wanted to see if we could work out, maybe trying to figure out a little more." And she's like, "Well, I don't know with this and this." Now, since we've been married, Steph is no longer a teacher. Her income is now down closer to what mine was when I was running a nonprofit. She's doing the dance teacher thing only. She's not a school teacher anymore. And I'm doing better than I was then, because we've been able to generate income and make things work for, the businesses and Safe House and stuff like that. So anyway, just progress, So when I told the bank, I said, "What if we took her out of it and we didn't consider her in the equation?" And they said, "Well, if you take her out of it and you take the current debt that she has, anyway, all this stuff, you can get that house for the amount that they're asking for if you do it by yourself." And I said, "That's fantastic. Let me go talk to my wife. Let me make sure that we're on the same page. I'll talk to the realtor." And so we did all that. We made an offer for this house. And then within 24 hours, that offer was accepted. I mean, and we were like thrilled. I mean, we were blitzing this process. We thought we found a house on a Wednesday. We scheduled a showing on a Friday. We saw this house on a Sunday. We made an offer on a Monday night. It got accepted on a Tuesday. This is amazing. We've only looked at 3 houses and here we are. We found the one that we want. So it's a 30-day process. Generally, you're under contract. The sellers are excited because there's going to be kids in the house again. They raised kids. They haven't had kids in the house in a while. They're excited to sell it to a young family. We're excited to be expanding. They're relocating across the country. It's just like working out, right? And even the sellers were like, "It's amazing. We prayed for this, and we believe this is God that's like putting these things together." And if you don't believe that kind of stuff, I get that can sound weird. And if you do believe that kind of stuff, you're like, "Man, this thing is rolling." Hold on. Because as the process went on, I picked a bank. I got pre-approved. They start the loan process. And then about 20 or so days into the 30-day process, my loan officer starts telling me things like, "We're going to figure it out, but there's a couple things that we're finding out as it relates to the businesses, that this first-time home buyer's loan it might not work." Right. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what are our options? Figure it out. Let's work the problem. You let me know what I need to do and we'll get it done. And so she's like, I got a plan. I think we're going to be okay, but we're going to do this and this and this. Now, as everybody knows, if you listen to the podcast, we've got, I think, 8 different entities, 8 different businesses that are all operating, 2 of which are nonprofits. They don't affect anything when it comes to this kind of stuff. The other ones, one I don't have any ownership stake in because it's owned by one of my partners. The One of them I have 100% stake in, but it's not old enough to affect the bank's process for loans and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But the other ones we've had long enough, and they in business, they show a loss, which means that they lost money, which is normal for businesses for the first several years sometimes, And so we've planned for it. We expect it, we make adjustments for it. But when you're in this loan process and you're in an FHA loan, which is the first time home buyer's loan, those are negative. Those are huge negatives against you. And so she's finding out this kind of stuff at like the 25 day point. I didn't know anything about all this. And so at day, I think it was 27 or 28, she calls me and she goes, "We're not going to be able to do it." And I was like, "What do you mean you're not going to be able to do it? Like, that's it. It's just over. I've given you dozens and dozens of pieces of paperwork. I've given you everything you've asked for. My income hasn't changed. The amount of money that I make hasn't changed. My job status hasn't changed. What's different between 28 days ago when you were like, 'You did it. Congratulations. Go make an offer,' to 28 days later, you're just telling me now I have to do something else. I have to find a cosigner." And so I was like, okay. So I made a couple calls and I'm like, I can't ask anybody to co-sign for me. I just don't feel like that's fair. I don't feel like that's right. If something were to happen to me or I were to not be able to make the payments, I don't want somebody else being responsible for that. It just didn't feel right. And so I made some phone calls to some family. I made some phone calls to trusted people, and I didn't ask anybody to be a co-signer, but somebody offered, and they're close to the family. They're trusted. They have some resource. It's not going to hurt them to take this kind of risk. And so, after some consultation with my wife and discussing things, I agreed. And this was all within day 28 and 29 of the original loan process. And so I'm telling this whole big long story because I want to bring some things around that I do think point back to that initial thought that the sellers were like, I think this is a God thing. I think that, the Lord works in mysterious ways, they kept on saying. And so the cosigner agreed. And then, so the bank had to start a completely different loan process over. Well, we asked for what's known as an extension to the contract that was set to expire on October 28th. The contract was set to expire on October 28th, and they asked for a 2-week extension. Now, if you look at your calendars, and if I'm remembering this right, if you look at your calendars in 2025, 2 weeks after October 28th is November 11th, which is a holiday. It's a federal holiday. It's Veterans Day, which means the banks are closed. So if you won't be able to close on the 11th because the bank, unless the bank finishes early, they're not going to have all the paperwork to the proper agencies that need to do it. And so I remember thinking that and going, I hope that federal holiday doesn't throw us off and make this a problem, because if the contract comes and goes and there's no signature and there's no closing, then I, as the buyer, can lose the house. The sellers are not obligated to sell it to me unless we're under contract. So the contract was set to expire on the 28th. The Friday before the 28th, we got an extension for 2 weeks, which took us to November 11th, right? So you fast forward and the loan officer is constantly calling me and saying, we've got everything we need. We're going to be able to wrap this up. And then the next day would go, I need this and this and this. And I am banging my head against the table. I'm sitting at work. I'm having trouble focusing because I'm trying to be available. If I'm in a meeting and I see that the loan officer's calling, I'm interrupting the meeting to pick it up to see if it's good news, if it's bad news, if they need something, because I don't want to delay the process by making them wait for me to do anything. And so I would be in meetings and I would get distracted because if the phone would ring and it'd be the loan officer, I'd be like, I got to take this. I don't know if she needs something that's important, or I don't want to delay the process on my end by making her wait to get it because, and this is, I'm not obviously going to say anybody's names, but there was a lot of part of this process where I struggled maintaining confidence in the loan officer's competency and ability. Okay. So I'm going to put it that way because I don't know anything about this process, but I know people who know about this process. And even they were questioning why some of the things that were being asked and some of the delays and some of the hurdles even existed,? And so I was trying to live in my ignorance and admit that I didn't know what the process was. and just let this person do their job. But I just kept wondering, like, why, we've done this already. Why is this still a thing? So anyway, so we get to November 11th. It's a holiday and they're not done. And the banks are closed. And the sellers are very nervous and they're texting me because we had exchanged phone numbers, which is not the norm when you're buying a house. You usually never have contact with the sellers. But we did because we actually bought some furniture off of them that they were going to keep in the house that we were just going to use. It was going to be ours. And so we had exchanged phone numbers thinking that this was going so smoothly. And again, that's when they told us, we're so grateful. This is a God thing. We believe that, we're thrilled there's going to be children in the house again. They met my kids. I mean, it was a whole thing. And so we get to the place where it's on the 11th. They're texting me and saying, when are you going to close? When are you going to close? And I said, well, I don't think I can close today. The banks are not open. And so they said, if we have to close on a house that we bought across the country on Monday, the 17th. If you don't get it closed in time, we're not going to get our proceeds and we're going to lose this house across the country. And I was like, man, I get that they're feeling pressure. I understand their situation. I obviously can't identify with it because if I lose this house, I'm still living in mine. I just find another one. If they lose their house that they're going to sell, they still have to move because I think it was work related. And so then they have to live in a hotel or Airbnb or whatever. And then they have to go through the whole process of starting over to sell their house again. And of course, we didn't want to lose the house, but if we did, we would have just found another one and started over. And so really the pressure was on them more than us. But, when your wife gets excited and your kids see it and you buy furniture, it's, you're kind of committed. And so I was like, the worst case scenario is that we lose this house and we have to start over. I really, really don't want that to happen. But, I kept telling myself, like, we're all together. There's no major injuries. Like, everybody's healthy. We're just trying to kind of put things in perspective. And so we get to November 11th, like I said, and then there's a little side story that I'm going to tell on the other side of this about external factors that added to the stress. And there's no closing. November 12th comes, no closing. November 13th comes, and they're saying, if you don't close by tomorrow, we're going to lose this house. And in my head, I'm thinking, is that a threat? If you lose this house, are you going to walk away from this deal, even though every day we're a day closer to closing? And about 4:00 on November 13th, we got the all clear that we were clear to close and that you could close. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the home buying process, when you get the clear to close, they send a letter to a title agency, which is basically like a real estate law firm type thing. And they're the ones that close the deal. And then they record the closed deal with the county that the house is in, and then it becomes public record and the deal is done, right? And so normally you have to wait about 3 days, but when you get the clear to close, they call you and they schedule a closing appointment for within 48 to 72 hours of when they get the clear to close. Because we got it at 4:00 on a Thursday and they have to close on their new house on a Monday, the very next Monday, 2 business days away. The title agency was like, we've got everything ready. We've been ready for about a week. If you can close tomorrow, we'll close tomorrow. And I was like, awesome, let's close tomorrow. And so they set me up for 3:30 in the afternoon to close. And I was like, if that's the earliest you can do, I'll take it. If you could do it yesterday, I'm ready yesterday. And everybody kind of chuckled and haha. And so I go to the title agency at 3:30, but at like 12:30 that day, I reach out and I'm like, I just want to confirm I haven't heard anything. I don't know if I'm supposed to hear anything. Is there anything that we're waiting on? I don't really know exactly how much I'm supposed to bring to the closing table for closing costs. I feel like I should know that. We're only a few hours away from the appointment. And the title agency said the bank hasn't given us what's known as the closing disclosure, which is the final piece of paper. And it's a stack. It's the final document that the title agency needs to wrap everything up. And they said they're still waiting on a few things. And if we don't get it by 2:00, we're going to have to reschedule. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm thinking, we're at the finish line. We've marched the ball 100 yards down the field. We're at the goal line. We cannot fumble. We have to finish this process. And so I called the loan officer and she's like, we need this, this, and this. There's a couple of debts. Like I have some credit cards but they're paid down. I've been working very vigorously to pay them down because I know that this process was going to happen. She's like, so I know that you paid them down, but the most recent statement shows an open balance. And I said, well, yeah, that's because the statement hasn't updated yet since I've paid it off, because I've paid it off in the last 30 days. And she's like, well, we're going to have you cut a check for that balance, for those balances. And it was a little over $1,500 total, which isn't terrible. Again, credit debt's one of those things. But for me, coming out of where I was when I was in my mid 30s, early 30s, this was small potatoes. And so I was like, I can do that. I said, but what's weird about it is that why am I writing checks to a credit card company that I've paid off? I'm going to send these checks, or I can't just show you the online stuff that shows that it's paid off and that suffice for whatever you guys need. And she's like, well, you've done that and we marked it, but this is just what they want to see. And the they in this process has been impossible to understand. Cause I'm like, I thought you were you're the bank. I don't know what's going on. And she's like, well, the underwriter, and this mysterious person who pulls all the strings, it wants to go ahead and have you write a check because then she can mark that she saw that it was paid off. And I'm like, yeah, but you've seen that it's whatever. We're right at the finish line. Tell me how much, tell me what I need to do. I want to wrap this up. So I'll never forget the amount because it was such a big deal. It was $1,622 and 0 cents, which doesn't even make sense because if you look at the credit card statements, there's change in there. Like it was weird. And so anyway, the actual amount was like $1,623.54, but they only wanted $1,622. And I'm like, okay, if this falls apart because of $1.54, I don't, who am I talking to? And so, excuse me, we close, right? And I say, is this going to record today? And it's about 4:30 in the afternoon at this point. And they said, well, it's not going to record today. We hope to record on Monday. And they gave that like eyebrow kind of like, we hope. And I was like, what do you mean you hope? Like why can't you record on Monday? Come to find out that the title agency said, we got a phone call from the county today, which is Trumbull County. And they said, we can't record anything. We're shut down and we're not allowed to tell you why. And we have no idea when we're going to be back up and operational. And so the title agency just was like, okay, like if that's all you can give us, that's all we can go on. So here we are. We've done the 30 days. We've done a 2-week extension. And then we went 3 days past the 2-week extension. So we actually had to get a second extension to close the gap of those like 3 days. It's Friday. We're closing. We're done. It's done. Now, the only thing that's left to do is for the title agency to record the transaction with the county. And once that's done, the bank can release the funds to the seller and they get their money for their house sale, right? Now that can't happen. So the deal is done. All papers are signed. They're notarized. Technically, I bought the house, but the bank can't release the funds until it's recorded, right? So now, even though we're closed, even though it's done, the sellers still might not get their money when they have to close on their house on Monday. And I'm thinking, I hope that me signing locks it down and they can't say, well, we're just going to walk away. This has been too chaotic. We didn't get our money yet. We're still going to find a way out of this and we're done. So now it's been a roller coaster because I've been told we're good. We're not good. Get a cosigner. Your cosigner is great for you. The loan process is done. We need you to pay off credit cards you've already paid off. We're ready to sign. When I went to sign, they were like, the bank still hasn't sent it yet. And then as I'm standing there, she refreshed her email and she's like, oh, there it is. And in my head, I'm like, just sweating. I've got my wife, I've got my cosigner, I've got all these people here. I've done everything that I can think of that's in my power. And on Monday, we come to find out that the county auditor's office experienced a cyber attack, was hacked, and they shut everything down in order to investigate and to make sure that there was no other like security risks from this cyber attack. And they weren't accepting recordings on Monday. They didn't accept recordings on Tuesday, and today is Thursday, and as of yesterday, they still were not recording anything. So the title agency and insurances and everything was able to figure out a way to use an insurance that we all have as part of this process that you pay for as part of the closing costs to distribute the sellers their funds. And just yesterday, around 11:30 in the morning, we're recording this on a Thursday. Just yesterday on a Wednesday around 11:30 in the morning, I got the text message that said, you can move into the house is yours. You can pick up the keys. You can start moving in. I mean, the relief, the chaos, the story has been absolutely unbelievably difficult. And so yesterday I went and I bought primer and I bought some paint samples and I started moving a few small things. And this morning I went to the house and I threw that primer on the wall and I threw the paint samples on the wall. And my wife's going to come over this afternoon and evening to take a look at it. She's doing some stuff out of town today and we're starting the process. And that's a big, long story and it's chaos. And if you don't care and you're not tuning into, you've kind of zoned out. But there's some things that I want to say before we wrap and lean towards wrapping that I learned about this process that I think are important for all of us, because this process did not make any sense to me. We call the podcast, Does That Make Sense? And we try to make sense out of the things that we can control, because there's so much of life that we can't control, right? And this was one of those things that we couldn't control. All I wanted to do was put my wife and kids in a home that's an appropriate size for them to grow up in. All I wanted to do was work on being out of debt that I got into foolishly when I was younger and make better decisions for my family, my finances, my financial future, my family's financial future, because I want it to make sense. I want my children to learn that value. And so to go through this process and to have like-minded people telling me it's a God thing, and in my head going, I don't disagree with that, but I also know that sometimes things just don't work out. You know what I mean? And I need to be open-minded enough and adaptable to not let situations that are outside of my control determine how well I'm going to treat other people, how well I'm going to process crisis, how well I'm going to support my wife and my kids if they don't get what they want or if I don't get what I want. There's so many layers to this. And so some of the things that I learned, I've always been a patient person. I tend to be long-suffering, if you're familiar with that term and that idea of being patient and letting people process and being able to put up with a lot. My dad always says that he has a really long fuse and that fuse is attached to a really big bomb, so he's got a lot of patience, but if it ever gets to the end of it, watch out. I like to think that I have a really long fuse, but the bomb that it's attached to is not as big. Like I'll get bothered and you'll know how I feel, but it's not going to want to make you dive under a table, And so the loan officer, I learned a lot of patience because I learned that sometimes a simple text message, she would tell me, I'll call you in 15 minutes. I've got some questions. And that would be at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. And I wouldn't hear from her again until 11 a.m. on Wednesday. And that bothered me so much because it was like, you could have texted and said, hey, I'm working on something else right now. I'll call you as soon as I can. Don't give me the time frame. And I know that I do it too, but I'm also not trying to help everybody get a loan all the time. So I learned, be honest with what you're doing, anyway, that's a different whole conversation. So I was frustrated about that, but the things that I couldn't control, I had to keep reminding myself, if you do the best with what you've got and you do the best with your ability to get to where you're going to have control over yourself, even though you don't have control over anything else. When something doesn't work out the way that you want, you still get to pick how you respond to it. You know what I mean? And that made sense to me. It was about finding what I could control, right? And leaning into the response rather than the situation. And during this entire thing, this is the side story, which it's not a side story. It's really the primary story because it took all of our time. During this whole process, at about the 35-day mark of the loan process, my wife calls me and says that her grandfather is being taken to the hospital because he's having trouble breathing. Walter is his name. He's 92 at this point, and he's been kind of frail, and he's been kind of on the not unhealthy end, but on the aging end. I mean, he's an old man. And so he got to the hospital. He had a heart attack. His heart was working at about half the capacity of what it was supposed to. So they admitted him, and they're working on things. And then it kind of started to become clear that there's a real possibility that Walter might not go home. Like he was old, he was weak, he was frail. So during this entire process, my wife is going to Pittsburgh. She's, visiting with her family. She's staying up there, and I'm at home, and I'm taking care of the kids. And, at one point, a couple weeks ago, Walter was asked, "What is it that you want?" And he said, "Well, I really like pie. So if I can get some pie, I'd like pie. And then I want to make it to my next birthday," which is, and it's so funny how these things work out. Funny might not be the right word. His birthday is Veterans Day. It's November 11th, which is also, and again, it's a subplot, but it's also the deadline of our extension to our house, the contract to try to close by. And so that was early November that he said that, maybe 10 days before or a week before. And then, so my wife is up there on November 10th, and then she spent the night on November 10th, and she comes home late at night, maybe 9-10 o'clock. She gets home on November 11th. And then about an hour and a half later, she gets a phone call that Walter had passed, that her grandfather had passed away. And so we're up and we're talking, and she's crying, and I'm supporting and consoling, and I'm asking if we need to, what can we do? Do we need to get you back up to the hospital tonight? She's like, she ended up staying at home that night, and she went back up, later. And so November 12th hits. We've got the stress of this house. We're now no longer under contract. Her grandfather had literally just passed hours before. This process is just working its way out. And so during all this, the family tensions raised because everybody's grieving and everybody's frustrated, and it's a big family, and there's lots of working parts. And so there's that normal grief chaos that comes with the death of, like, especially an old kind of patriarch of the family, like the grandfather, because everybody has their experiences with him. Some good and some bad, some difficult, some complicated. So there's just all those things playing in. All the while, we've got in the back of our heads, are we going to get this house? Are we going to lose this house? Can we, is this going to be a problem? And so you learn a lot about compartmentalizing. You learn a lot about patience. You learn a lot about the process. And so what I want to say to wrap up today is, I really just told a 45-minute long story, but the lessons that I learned are the things that I want to pull from this. And it's that you can't always control your situation. You can't always control your situation, but you always have control over what you do about it. You have control over how you respond, what you say to somebody, how you react, how you support, what you choose to focus on. You have control. Only you, the person that's listening to this, you might not have control over your situation, but you do have control over what you do about it. You have control over what you say. You don't always have control over what you think, but you do have control over what you focus your thoughts on, right? And so you might think unhealthy thoughts or dangerous thoughts or angry thoughts or frustrating thoughts, and those you might not be able to control, but you can control over which ones you repeat and let echo, and which ones take root, and which ones you act on. Those are things that you have control over. And to say that you don't is, frankly, exposing a level of weakness or immaturity that, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you're better than, And so I don't mean that in a crass, insensitive way. I mean it in an encouraging one, that when you face a situation and you don't know what to do, don't ask yourself, what do I do? Ask yourself this question: what do I have control over? What do I have control over right now? And if the only thing that you have control over is your response, great. That's okay. You don't have to have control over anything else in that moment. And then start going down the, big picture. What do I have control over? I have control over this. I have control over this. I have control over this. Then you start kind of going down the funnel. Now, what do I do about this thing that I have control over? What do I do about this thing that I have control over? And then you process through that thing that way. For me, I didn't have process over whether or not it was going to happen on time, but I did have control over whether I got the loan officer everything she needed on time. I did have control whether I woke up and said, today, I'm not going to make it so this loan is going to make or break my whole day. I did not have control over the health of my grandfather, but I did have control over what I could do to support my wife. I didn't have control over how she responded to me because she's dealing with both the stress of the house and the stress of her grandfather. And if she were to put that on me, I don't have control over that. But I do have control over whether I snapped back or I treated her poorly because she was projecting onto me. So instead I said, I have control over this. She needs support. What can I do to support? And so it was a growing opportunity for me. It was a growing opportunity for how I encounter conflict, because then an added layer to this is that as a pastor and as a minister, I got asked to do the funeral service for Walter. And if you've never done a funeral service, it's hard enough. Pile on the fact of funeral service for a family member, a little bit more difficult. Pile on the fact that that family member was the patriarch where the entire family's entire existence revolved around this man, another layer of difficulty. And pile on the fact that Walter, in a long life, made some decisions that really hurt some people that I disagreed with. And I didn't want to stand up there and act like he was a saint, because we're not perfect people. You know what I mean? We're not perfect people. We make mistakes, and some of those mistakes are on purpose, and not on purpose, but some of those mistakes hurt people, and that hurt is intentional, and other times it's accidental. And that's kind of the category that I think he fell in, where he didn't know that some of those things were as hurtful as they were. And so all I'm saying is, when you are in a situation that you don't have control over, ask yourself, what do I have control over? And I guarantee you, you will always have control over what you do about the situation. Okay? Does that make sense? It takes a long time. I don't think anybody's going to watch this podcast and be like, I'm not going to overreact anymore. But it is possible to learn to say, take a breath, ask myself, what do I have control over? I could go for another hour about each of those two things. The dynamic of a family member passing and then being responsible for that service and supporting the family is one that I really cherish. I love to provide that level of support for people, but it comes with a certain component of stress and chaos. Pile that on with this big family move, which in perspective is small potatoes, but it's still stressful. So I really am grateful for the opportunity and the experience that I learned through this process. And I hope that my story resonates with anybody, that no matter what you are going through, no matter where you're at in your life, whether it's a relationship, whether it's school, whether it's a work-related thing, I guarantee you don't have control over everything. Don't zoom in on what you don't have control over. Don't give away your ability to have control over what you do about something, and you're already on the right track. You're already moving in a direction that gives you a sense of peace, even when the storm and the chaos is going like crazy. So with that, I want to wrap up. I want to wish everybody a super happy holiday season. Like I said, this is going to be airing. We're past Thanksgiving at this point. We're leaning into Christmas. Have a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year. In the comments, let's go ahead and talk about some things that we're hoping for 2026. I want to hear what you're going to work on. Resolutions are kind of a fad thing and everybody talks about them, but what are some goals? What do you hope happens in 26? Maybe you're hoping for a relationship. Maybe you're looking to buy a house. I don't know, but tell me what you're going to do or what you're going to try to do in 2026. We're going to lean into it. We're going to have a really awesome rest of this year. We're going to lean into next year, full throttle. And here's pretty soon, we're going to have Reese back on the podcast, and we're going to be cooking in my new kitchen. And we're going to have him, and we're going to share some food. We're going to cook some food. We're going to talk about it. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. This is Does That Make Sense? See you soon.